G'day guys, Socket here. Today's viewer's question comes from bsbabcock or Babs, who writes, I found nice results doing my target curves to a completely flat line, tuning all the drivers to flat targets, then applying a low-end shell filter to the drivers playing in that range, and then if you want to do the same, to roll off the highs to taste. I wonder how individual drivers would respond to that. It would be an interesting question. So I think what Babs is saying is, instead of tuning all of his speakers to a house curve, where it starts off pretty flat at the high end and then gradually, from about 250 rolls up, using, something like a Jazzy or a JL or a Whitledge house curve, he's had some success with tuning all of his speakers to a completely flat house curve and then using shell filters to give the low end rise or a high end cut, and he's wondering whether using shell filters in that way would cause problems with your phase and timing if you've already sort of completed your tune. And it's a really good question. So today we're going to have a look at what shell filters are and how you might use them to increase or decrease your bass and treble in your system, and whether using shell filters actually causes problems with your phase and timing. So let's go take a look. So what exactly are low shelf and high shelf filters? Well, they're just another form of electronic filter like a crossover or an EQ filter that you can use to manipulate the shape of a speaker. And so if you're in the Helix DSP, you can find these shelf tools under this little drop down where all your EQ tools are. And so let's start by having a look at a high shelf. And we use the high shelf basically to manipulate the tweeters in your system or the treble end of your system to either boost or cut the amount of treble, right? So a high shelf filter, just like an EQ filter, has a frequency, a Q value, and a boost or cut or decibel value, right? So let's say, for example, we're going to add a high shelf filter at 7,500, and we want to add on some, hang on, let me put on a reference graph so you can see what's happening. So let's say I'm going to put on 4 dB of gain, right? So I'm going to put on 4 dB of boost, and now you can see that my tweeters are now playing all this extra treble, right? So the system is going to sound, the top end's going to be much brighter than it was before. Or let's say, oh boy, it is a bit hot, it's a bit shouty, a bit sparkly, I want to cut that out and calm that down a little bit. Maybe I'm going to, put a 4 dB cut, right, and get rid of all of that. Or, well, I've gone a bit too far, maybe, I only want to cut out, maybe 2. There we go. Just cut out a little bit. So being able to use your cut and boost or your frequency values or your Q values, you can shape the tweeters, responses, or the treble end of your system the way you like, using a high shelf filter. Now, a low shelf filter is exactly the same, but we use it for our subwoofers. Subwoofers, here you are, thank you. And so, for example, I want to add more bass to my system, right? So I'm going to put in a low shelf filter at, let's see, let's make it 30, and I want more bass in my system, so I'm going to add on reference. Where's my reference button? There we go. Let's say I'm going to add on 6 dB of extra boost, right? And so now my system's going to be more bassy because I've got extra bass playing. And I'd say, oh, I actually want a little bit more than that, so I might increase the frequency to 58, and now all of this is extra bass, right? And once again, you can also play around with your Q values to affect more or less frequencies, right? So just like a high shelf filter, you can use it to manipulate the low end or the bass end of your spectrum and the shape of your subwoofers. Okay, now that we've covered high shelf and low shelf filters, let's go and look at the scenario that Babs was talking about. So first of all, we're going to pull up our house curves. So I've made all these house curves with a target level of 70. So our tweeters, our mids, our mid bass, and our sub. and of course now we have a nice flat line. So then I've taken the speakers and I've then EQ'd them to each of the house curves. So if we kind of start with the, well, let's start with the tweeters. All right, so I've EQ'd those, and then the mids, we've EQ'd those as well, and then the mid bass, same again. And then, of course, the subs. So now we have all of our speakers EQ'd to this 70 house curve, and we can quickly have a look at how all of these things are, stacking up. So let's start with the tweeters, and let's look at how they're, how the phase and the impulse are stacking up. So if I go to overlays and we go to impulse and we just clear everything out. And let's bring up the left tweeter and the right tweeter and fit to data. Okay, so they're both green, which is perfect. And, oops, here we go. There we are. All right, so we've got the left tweeter and the right tweeter, and they are bang on top of each other. And if I bring in the left mid and the right mid, you can see that they also are all on top of each other. So the tweeters and the mids are all time aligned, to this point. No problems, all good. If we flick over to the phase, zoom up to this end, because that's what we want to look at when we're looking at those types of things. We've got the left tweeter, and let's zoom into there. Okay, that's the left tweeter and the right tweeter. So there, they look pretty good all the way down. All right. We look at the left mid and the right mid, same thing, all in phase and in time. So that's great. That's the mids and the tweets. So next thing we can look at is the mid bass and the left and right mid bass. Now they're going to be operating way down here somewhere. So we're interested in this region, and you can see they're in phase, right? Starting to separate up here, about 500, but we're not so worried about that, and yeah, all fine. So the left and right mid bass are in phase, and then down, if we add the sub to this, once again, in the areas that they're operating, they're all on top of each other. So so far so good. If we go and look at how those things are all sort of adding up, and we'll start with the tweeters. So go to the alignment tool, we can turn that one off, and let's just start with the left tweeter and the right tweeter. So yep, no problems at all. I'll switch that to impulse so we can see it. Good. Then we go to the mids, so left mid, right mid. That's all adding up fine as well. A little bit out here, but it's probably a bit phasey, but looks okay. Left mid bass, right mid bass. We've got something going on here, but these impulse responses, I'm not worried about impulse, to be honest. I'm more interested in phase when I'm looking at these low frequency things, and so all through here it's all in phase. So that's great. And then what else we would look at? Left mid bass and the sub. So full summation through there, and right mid bass and sub, full summation there. And if we quickly look at the, say, right mid bass and the right mid, that's summing up, and then the left mid and the left mid bass also summing up. Good. So everything is time aligned, everything is in phase, and so we've got all of our measurements here, right? All of these things, all time aligned, all phase aligned along a flat target curve. Alrighty, so with that done, we'll just work out the summations. So the tweeters are summing up, the mids are summing up, as are the mid bass, and then we have the left mid bass and the sub, and the right mid bass and the sub. So when you play the speaker pairs together, you end up with an average of 4.5, something like that. So we now have we need that one there as well. We now have a new target line, which is around about the 75 mark, something like that. Okay, So happy days. All right, so now what we want to do is essentially what Babs was talking about was we don't want our tune in our car to be dead flat. We want, maybe I want a little bit of a rise on the tweeters, to give me a little bit more sparkle. I want a bit more brightness. And I want more bass at this end. It's not going to be enough bass for me, so I want to lift this end up. And so I'm going to apply a high shelf filter to my tweeters. And let's just get rid of all of that for a second. Oh, left tweeter, right tweeter. And so I go into the DSP. I bring up a high shelf filter for my left tweeter. I put in a frequency of 7,000 with a 6 dB rise. Okay, and so boom, here I go. I've got a bit more extra level, running from about 5,000 all the way up. I'm picking up an extra, 76, so about 6 dB, which is what I was aiming for, right? And so I do the same to the right hand side as well. All right, so great. Now the question is, we know that the green measurements were perfectly in time and in phase. So what happens when I add a high shelf filter to these speakers? All right, well, so first of all, let's go and have a look in the overlays. Open that up. Let's get rid of all of that, and we'll start with the impulse responses. And let's just look at the left tweeter and the left tweeter that we've just added the high pass to. And yeah, okay, so really it hasn't moved, right? It's there. If I look at the right hand side as well, left tweeter and the right tweeter, no, it also hasn't moved. Okay, but if I zoom right in and I look at the left and right, they're pretty much on top of each other. They're out by 1, maybe 2 microseconds. And I now bring up the ones with the high pass in it. Wonder why they're way down here, but no matter. Once again, they're maybe 1 microsecond. So the takeaway is adding the shelf filter really hasn't changed the impulse response, right? They're still in time. They may be a fraction out from, they've changed in time by maybe 3 microseconds, but honestly, bugger all, right? Very, very small change. So let's go and see what happens to the phase. Yeah, we can do that. So let's just get rid of all of that. We'll go into phase. We want to be way up this into the scale. And before we had the left tweeter, and let's look at the left tweeter now. And you can see that they're not exactly on top of each other. They have moved a little bit. They have moved a fraction. Something like 8,537 to 8,563, so maybe 30 hertz, up in this range, but they're still pretty damn close. And if we look at the right hand side, do the same thing, right to right, we get the same pattern. If we just bring up the left and right and we overlay the other two, they're all in the same ballpark, right? They've moved, but they haven't moved very much. In fact, they've moved together. Yeah. So, in other words, adding a 6 dB high shelf filter to your tweeters has changed the timing by 3 microseconds, virtually nothing, and has also changed the phase by 20 or 30 hertz at around 8,000 hertz or something like that, which is insignificant. So for all intensive purposes, this plot, the new plots or new measures with the high shelf filter are really identical. They are still in phase and still in time. But what about the low end of the spectrum, right? So we wanted to go and measure the low end. So let's see, we had the left mid bass and the right mid bass and the sub, and now we want to go and add a low pass, a low frequency rise. So we want more bass, and so what we're going to aim to do is let's see, a sub with a low shelf filter rise of 16 dB, right? We're going to aim for that, and there we go. And we're also going to put 12 dB on our mid bass, so low shelf filter, 200 Hertz with 12 decibels, right? So we're going from the green original measurements where we EQ'd everything to the orange ones on the mid bass and to this pink one on the sub, right? So a 12 dB rise and a 6 dB rise, right? So once again, let's go and see how they kind of all stack up. So let's see, let's get started with the left and left mid bass. So the best place to start with is probably the phase. So we're going to go way down the other end into their operating range. So, you know, down here around the 300 mark, something like that. And we're going to bring up the new left mid-range measure and the, left mid-bass measure and the right mid-bass measure. And you can see that, you know, down here, once again, they are still in phase. If we compare them to the original measurements, left mid-bass and the right mid-bass, the pattern is the same, right? So they are still in, they're still in phase, but they have time shifted, they've moved or shifted to the left. So, you know, that's 204 and they've shifted to 200. So they've moved about 4 degrees at 200, 173 to 169, about 4 degrees at, you know, 160. So yes, the phase has moved, but they have moved together. And so let's have a look at what's happened to the sub, right? So we'll turn off these orange ones and we'll turn on the original sub measure, which was there, and we're interested in this range down here, right? So here's the original sub, right? So time aligned. And if we now turn on the new sub, which is this one here with the 16 dB of increase, you'll now see that it's out of phase with the old measurements, right? But if we bring in the new measurements, you know, this one and this one, boom, it's they're in phase again, right? So the same type of thing is going on with the original sub measurements versus the new sub measurements. They have moved, you know, 85 to 80, you know, about 3 Hertz there. What's this one? 112, 108, about 4 Hertz. So once again, they've all moved to the left. So it looks like that, once again, these are still in time and still in phase, right? And in fact, one way to double check it is to go into the alignment tool and just look at how it's summing up, right? So this time we're going to pick the, let's see, the right mid bass with 12 dB gain towards the sub with 16, right? And look at that. Still summing up. I can change it to the right hand and it's still summing up. So adding the, so just get rid of all of that, bring in the sub and the mid basses and the original sub and the mid basses. Okay, so adding the low shelf filter, adding that 6 dB with a low shelf filter, adding 12 dB with a low shelf filter did move the phase, but it moved it in equal amounts so that all of these speakers, all of the new positions that the speakers were in are still in phase and still in time. So at the end of the day, when we're using our low shelf and our high shelf filters, and we end up with something that looks like this. Okay, so we've got our tweeters, we've got our mids, we've got a rise on our mid bass, and we've got a rise on our sub, right? And we get that typical, you know, shape Okay, we've added a rise here, but we've got that typical house curve shape that we see in all of our traditional commercial house curves. So I guess the answer to Babs's question is you can add low shelf and high shelf filters without necessarily making or causing trouble with your phase and timing. Yes, it does move them absolutely, but at the higher end by very small amounts, by larger amounts at the low end of the spectrum. So it would probably be a good idea to go back and check the phase and summations of your low end speakers, but it looks like you can add quite large amounts of gain, like 12 dB, to your low end without affecting your time alignment or your phase alignment, which is fabulous news. So there you go, guys. If you want to make an adjustment to your system, but you want to add a bit more bass or take a little bit of the top end off, then it looks like that low shelf and high shelf filters are a perfect tool. So Babs, I hope that answered your question, mate. For everybody else, I hope you found that interesting. As always, if you've got questions or comments, please feel free to throw them down below. Otherwise, I will catch you in the next episode.